The Last Line is a completely free podcast, but takes a lot of time, effort, and hard work to make happen. So if you'd like to support the show, then please head over to patreon.com/The Last Line. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time you're listening to this podcast. My name is James Alban, and you are listening to episode 14 of The Last Line. Thank you very much for joining me. In this episode, you will hear a conversation between me and none other than actor Stephen Tobolowsky. Stephen is an American actor who has appeared in over 200 films. His IMDb page at the moment, at the time of recording this, lists 268 credits as an actor. He's appeared in such films as Spaceballs, Groundhog Day, Great Balls of Fire, Bird on a Wire, Thelma and Louise, Basic Instinct, Calendar Girl, Murder in the First, The Glimmer Man, Power 98, Boy's Life 2, Mr. Magoo, Black Dog, The Insider, Bossa Nova, The Operator, Memento, which we talk a little bit about later, National Security, Freaky Friday, Frankie and Johnny Are Married, A Date with Tad Hamilton, Garfield, Miss Congeniality 2, Stephen Tobolowsky's If you want to see all of his credits, then you can go to his Wikipedia page or his IMDb page. It is staggering. So really someone who has some incredible stories about working in the film and television industry, but he's also got some great stories from his life, which he has recorded in a podcast called the Tobolowsky Files. He's also written these stories in books such as The Dangerous Animals Club, Cautionary Tales, and My Adventures with God. So really an hour wasn't enough with Stephen, and hopefully we can get him back on it again at another time. But in the podcast, we managed to touch on how the Tobolowsky Files came about in the first place. We also talk about his time working with Christopher Nolan on Memento. So if you haven't seen that film, there will be spoilers potentially for that. So I would encourage you to go and watch the film before you listen to our discussion on that. We also talk about Stephen's faith. He is a Jewish man, and I think it's always interesting on this podcast, as me as an atheist, to talk to people who have different beliefs and different views, and it's I think talking to Stephen is very interesting because he has a very logical way of looking at his religion, and I found it fascinating. Hopefully you will do too. So without further ado, here is Stephen Tobolowsky. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, The Drew Carey Show, That 70s Show, Malcolm in the Middle, Law and Order Criminal Intent, CSI Miami, Will and Grace, The West Wing, According to Jim, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Deadwood, Entourage, Heroes, Glee.
I think my wife and I, before we were married, now we've been married 30 years. Before we were married, we drove to Bristol. So in my mind, I am seeing Bristol in my head. And as I recall, it was one of our favorite cities. We love Bristol and Bath.
Bath's great. Bath's lovely as well.
It's gorgeous. But we love Bristol. We love Bristol very much. We didn't know what to expect. So
it's a cool place to, obviously, I think whenever you've grown up somewhere, you sort of, you can kind of be disparaging about somewhere, I think, because you just get bored of it.
Yeah, right.
But having moved out of Bristol, and when you meet people that don't come from Bristol or have only been there a couple of times or haven't been there at all, you sort of realize how, it's a pretty cool city, actually. There's a lot going on for quite a small little city. I guess a good place to start to just explain how the Tobolowsky Files came about, because I think that's a good sort of jumping off point, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's a great jumping off point, because it's probably one of the pivotal moments of my life in that I had just been injured. is really how the Tobolowsky Files started. I was thrown off of a horse riding on the side of an active volcano in Iceland. Right. And I remember I was going like, the decisions we make in our lives. My God. So anyway, at the time, I didn't realize how terrible the injury was. The people in Iceland said that the doctors in Reykjavik said that they thought I had a fractured vertebra when I got back to the United States. My doctor told me I'd been terribly misdiagnosed and I had broken my entire neck, like 5 vertebrae, multiple breaks in all 5. And the middle vertebra, C4, as it's known in the trade, was crushed. So I basically had the same injury Christopher Reeve, if you remember him, who played Superman, had. I had the same injury, but I was walking and talking. And
how do you manage to have the same injury that Christopher Reeve has, but it doesn't, like, you look fine now. So like,
interesting question. Now, interesting question. So let's go back in time, as we are able to do on a podcast, to a few months before this idiotic moment where I ride on my horse on the side of the volcano. So I was having trouble as an actor in that I was losing my voice. And I don't mean that I was getting hoarse. I mean, after about 2 hours of the day, my voice would vanish. And I was terrified, and I didn't know what to do. And I went to one of those throat doctors, and he said that I had a growth on one of my vocal cords, like the size of a macadamia nut. And it was not cancerous, but that I was going to have to be silent for 2 months. For 2 months.
So suddenly you became a mime artist.
In Los Angeles here, we have ashrams where people pay to be silent for a week. Yeah. For me, for free. I was going to be silent for 2 months. And he said, no humming, no laughing, no whispering, no sighing, nothing. I had to be silent for 1 month so this is gross. So the bleeding on the vocal cord would stop. Around the growth. Then I would have vocal surgery, then silent for a month after that so the surgery could heal. So it was during that during that month of silence, when you're silent for a long period of time, it's like they say about how blind people, their other senses become more attuned. So in that period of silence, I became more attuned to all sorts of things around me, and one of which was I began to realize I had these headaches all the time, constant, persistent headaches. And I was pretty certain I had a brain tumor. Very certain. So I go to the doctor, and at this point I cannot speak. So I'm just writing on a pad, have constant headaches, looked up WebMD, probable brain tumor. So,
by the way, never a good thing to look it up on.
No, stay away from WebMD. All you people, stay away. So the doctor did a series of x-rays, and he said the reason I had all these headaches was that I had advanced arthritis of the neck. And my arthritis of the neck was so bad. It was one of the worst he had ever seen. And this was very depressing for me because I figured this guy had done nothing but look at necks for all of his whole life. So by comparison, it was bad. And he said, my neck was so bad that the vertebra had deformed. And how everybody has a curve in their cervical spine that's kind of like this C shape. My neck was bent in the opposite shape because of this arthritis. It had warped my neck and bent it. So now I'm leaving this doctor's office feeling I have this enormous curse, that my neck is now the opposite of a normal human being because of this arthritis. And the curse, several months later, we go back in time to my broken neck. The doctor is telling me, do you want to know why you're alive? Do you want to know why you're not a cripple? It's because everybody has a curve in their cervical spine exactly the same way, this C curve, but yours is the opposite. And what it did is it forced a lot of the flow from the horse into my shoulders instead of into my neck, snapping my neck in two. And so this thing, alert, 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 for anybody who climbs K2 or anything else, is that the thing that we think is the curse really turned out to be the blessing. So I kind of wrote down on my notepad, never trust a catastrophe. It could turn into a blessing before you know it. And so during this period of time when I had to be silent, recovering from my broken neck, the doctor had told me, this was a fatal injury, which it wasn't. But I began to wonder what if it was a fatal injury. And I have 2 little boys. And what are the stories that I never got to tell my kids about their dad? And that is when what the Tobolowsky Files began. Because when you can't talk and you can't move, because I had this neck brace on, I could write. So I started writing these stories from my life that I wanted to share with my 2 boys about, like, when I first fell in love, the girl I proposed to when I was 5, Alice Nell Allen. First time I saw someone play the piano and was amazed when I was 8. When I wanted to be a scientist, when I fell in love with Beth in college, trying to become an actor, being thrown out of acting school and still staying with it, different film projects I'd been on. So I started writing all the stories I never told my boys. And then during this period of time, a fellow who was a master's of something at Harvard, David Chen, had heard of this one storytelling movie I did called Stephen Tobolowsky's Birthday Party. And he called me at home. He got my number, and he called me at home and said, do you have any stories that you would like to share with the world? Because I would like to record your stories. I love this storytelling movie, Stephen Tobolowsky's Birthday Party, that you did, that they showed at the Comedy Festival for HBO in Aspen. I go, well, sure. As a matter of fact, I am writing these new stories now. So as I heal, once my 2 months of silence had ended, I began recording these stories with David Chen, and they became the Tobolowsky Files. And then a program director in Seattle, Washington, that's a big city here in the United States, where there are lots of young drug addicts. So if there's any drug addict out there and you're young enough, come to Seattle. It's a beautiful city. So Jeff Hansen, who was the program director at the NPR National Public Radio stations, he had heard these stories on the internet. And he wrote me at home and said, can we put these on the radio? So they ended up on national radio. And then other radio stations picked them up. And so the Tobolowsky Files ended up going all over the world. And now I think we have something like 83 or 84 hours of programming of shows. And I've written several more. David and I are going to record again later this summer when he finishes his Game of Thrones podcast, which is really big here in America.
I have to confess, there being so many hours of content, I haven't listened to all of them, but I've given it a good shot.
Oh, that's good.
And I'm still sort of I'm getting through. I mean, they've been a welcome train companion.
Well, yes, they're good on the train. They're good if you're walking your dog. They're good if you go to the gym.
Yeah, they're a good length as well. They're like because I've always tried to keep this podcast at like around about an hour, like just under an hour, because I think like if you're going for a run or you're going on the train or something like that's like a good time length, because I can't listen to podcasts that go on for like 3 hours because you just lose your place, and it's just like So I listened to a couple more today in preparation.
Uh-oh.
And I literally just listened to the auditions one because I've been sort of skipping around. I listened to your one about auditions, and you talk about Memento in it.
Yes.
And I'm a very big Christopher Nolan fan.
Yeah.
As I think a lot of sort of budding directors sort of my age are. Like, that was the popular thing at film school, is like Chris Nolan. He's the guy. So it was interesting hearing that episode, because it was interesting hearing you talk about how you were reading it, and it started off and you were like, this is either the best script I've ever read or the worst script I've ever read.
Well, okay, you're a graduate of film school, so you know this, but some of the people who listen to the podcast aren't.
Yeah.
And just saying, there is a length that a first draft movie script should be. In America, that length is 120 pages, and at that length, it's too long. 120 pages, an executive producer will say, well, we'll read it, but it should be 110, 100, and if you even get it to 98, I'm really thrilled, because the format of screenwriting is done a very specific way, with the indentation to where one page equals 1 minute. So 120 pages is a 2-hour movie. That's plenty. Anyway, the script of Memento, now I'm making this up. I don't remember the exact number of pages. It was like Gone with the Wind. I get this script, and it's like 340 pages or something. I'm thinking, like, what is this? I mean, it's enormous. It's like reading the Bible. And I'm going, what is this script we've got? So that is what predicated my saying, this has got to be the worst script in the world. Editing, guys, editing. So I start to read the script of Memento, and I see that most of the script really is Chris and his brother very specifically detailing each setup and shot to where, okay, it's going to be a medium shot, and we see the shoulder of the fellow who runs the motel, and then through the window we see Leonard walk up to the window, and we should see this much of his shirt, and he's wearing the exact. And so it gives the exact picture of the movie of what it is. So as I'm reading the movie, just like anybody who sees Memento, and if there's anybody in the sound of my voice who hasn't seen this movie, it is a must-see. It is spectacular. And I'm reading it, and I'm going, like, at about page 100, I'm going, damn, this is kind of engrossing. I cannot believe what this type of narration. I've never seen a film narrated it visually this way. And that's why... Because in
film school, we were always told, don't write what the camera's doing unless it's like critical that it needs to like reveal something, but you don't talk about camera moves. You don't say this is a close-up, this is over a shoulder. Like in the scripts, you're always told not to do that.
Yeah, you don't do that. You don't do that. So as I'm reading, so I'm halfway through the script, and my wife came through the room, and I'm going, God damn it. And she says, what is it? And this is when I utter the line. I said, this is either going to be, I know it's going to be terrible, because this is so spectacular. There is no way the ending of this film. Also, here's a footnote. In film school, you probably also learned, everybody jumps into Act 1 when they write films. That's usually what they okay, I'm going to begin with the chase scene. I'm going to begin with this. This is where I start. But nobody really thinks through Act 3. They just go like, well, when it gets time to it, I'm sure the ending of this damn film will come to me. And that's why movies
I've been that.
are so bad, because people don't have the endings of the movies. And I actually did when we were doing Bird on a Wire. Yeah, we sat down for the first read through with that. Mel Gibson, Goldie Hawn, and John Badham was directing that. We're reading, and the script, it's a fairly well-made action film of that time, of that genre, and John Badham is pretty spectacular at making action films. He did War Games, and he's a pro at that. So you feel you're in great hands. We're doing the first read-through, and the script ends before the end of the movie. The first read-through, and John just is laughing and going like, "Well, we're going to have a big chase. We're going to have a big action set piece at the end. And it's going to be spectacular, and it's all going to tie everything. It's going to be great." And so, in that point, even the pros sometimes just leave Act 3 to the wind. Oh, that could be a title. Leave Act 3 to the wind.
That's good, actually.
That's
good.
But so I'm reading Memento, and I get to the end of this script, probably 2 hours later, and I throw it across the room, this huge tome. I throw it across the room, and Anne comes up and goes, "What? Terrible?" And I go, "The best screenplay I've ever read." I am shaking. And I got on the phone immediately and called my agent and said, "I have to go in and read. I have to go in and read for Sammy Jenkins. I have to go in and do this. I have to meet Chris. This is spectacular. I'll wash Chris's car. I'll do the dishes. I'll do whatever to be a part of this movie." And that's how I got my audition for Chris. And I believe I have this correct. This is the podcast where I go in and Chris said, "Well, there isn't a lot for you to read for Sammy Jenkins." And I go, I'm not going to read, Chris. I'm not going to read because, as you said, there aren't any really scenes for it. But I just want to say, there are going to be a lot of people who walk through this door who are going to want to be in this movie because it's so good. But I will be the only one, I bet, who has ever had amnesia. And Chris goes, "You had amnesia?" And that opens the doorway to, I had surgery. I had this kidney surgery where they used an experimental drug on me without my permission. They gave me a general anesthetic. Instead of putting me to sleep, it wiped my memory out. And the reason for this is I'm like 6'3" and I weigh like 200 pounds. So when you have a big patient, you're able to give that patient commands. Go get up on the operating table, lie down, and they forget the pain. It isn't that they don't experience the pain. It's that they immediately forget the pain they go through. It's very much like the Bourne Identity, something like that.
Yeah.
But like any general anesthetic, it takes several days for it to run through your body. So after the kidney surgery, I come home, and then I feel like I'm totally normal, and then boom, I'm born, and I'm standing in the living room, and I have a half a glass of water in my hand. And I have no idea where the water came from, what I was doing in the living room, if I had drunk half a glass of water and was going back to the kitchen to get more, or I had no idea. And this started happening for the next several days. And it was really bad when I was standing over the toilet, and boom, I'm born. And I'm holding little Steve, and I'm there standing over the toilet, and I didn't know what I was. Well, I figured out what I was doing there, but I had all the clues in my hand in front of me, but I did not know if I had gone or not gone or what. And then my wife in the next room yells, "You went 10 minutes ago. Flush the toilet and come back." So I had these big periods of time where I was forgetting things. And so I was able to at least use this memory, this idea in Memento, playing Sammy Jenkins.
I couldn't help but think when you were talking about that those are deleted scenes from the Bourne Identity that we just never saw, with like Matt Damon just standing over the toilet trying to think about whether he'd gone or not. But just to... when you have amnesia, do So when you're in that sort of state of you don't know where you are, you can't remember how you got there, are you able to remember why you have amnesia? Or, if you see what I mean, are you able to remember, oh, it's because of the anesthetic they gave me, or are you just completely like confused?
You are complete. You are in a mystery. It is a mystery. Now later, when you have cognition and you're feeling confident with your stream of thoughts, you can have a discussion with your wife and going like, this weird stuff's happening to me, and you have that discussion. Oh, it's probably this drug. But when you're in the midst of that forgetting, you forget that.
Yeah.
You don't have any memory of that. It's like it's kind of a little different than when you go out and you have too much to drink. And then you kind of, oh my God, what happened last night? Oh my gosh. But you are aware of the fact that you went and tied one on last night. Whereas when I had the amnesia, it was like you are born moment one. So you have no sense of past. You have no sense of where you're going. And this is the difficult thing about doing the Sammy Janka scenes in Memento. I always tell people that, I've had bigger parts and I've had more flashy parts or whatever, but never a more difficult part, because I realized as soon as Chris started shooting that the only thing that drives an actor through the scene is their motivation. Like Marlon Brando, you say, what's motivation? Is what is my goal in the scene? And when you have amnesia, for real, you have no goal. So
you have no idea.
You have no idea where you're going or what you're doing. So as an actor in the moment, I had the choice to fake it and kind of pretend I kind of had a goal to know where the scene was going, or to risk it being absolutely disastrous and putting it in Chris's hands, which is what I opted to do, and just do it like I have amnesia, where I have no idea where the scene's going and no idea what I'm doing. And that was the scariest for me. It's like tightrope walking blindfolded. It was very scary as an actor.
But it obviously worked out.
Oh, yeah.
And you say like you've had bigger roles, etc. But like, if I remember Memento correctly, and it's been a while since I last saw it. I've seen it a few times, but it's been a while. But your role in that film is pretty crucial to the overall story, isn't it? Because it's about how isn't it about how because you're. I'm trying to remember Memento. Yeah. But you're a pretty crucial role in the story, aren't you? Because
Chris always seems to have these kind of roles in his films. If you think about Inception, there was the central kind of jewel of Inception is the father-son relationship that's within the vault at the end, and there's always this one little kind of gem, but is really a kind of spiritual spine for the movie. And in the movie, it was unclear whether Sammy, my character, was Guy's character, Leonard, the main character, because he has amnesia in the film, and it's unclear whether he is envisioning his life through me and whether I even existed. Which is one of the reasons why the film is so brilliant, is that they're able to tell a narration that's that complicated and make it viewable and palpable for a general audience, and suspenseful. It's just an amazing film.
If no one's seen it, they definitely need to check it out. Was there any? I'll keep going on about Memento, but it's a chance for me to talk to someone who was in a Chris Nolan film, so I'm gonna geek out. Was there? Because Chris Nolan I think he'd done one feature film before that, but it was sort of a feature film that he'd done like at weekends when he had time off from his job, and he'd like got his friends together. I guess this applies generally as well. Whenever you've worked with a first-time director, is there any sort of hesitation on your, I mean, maybe not for Memento because you love the script so much, but is there any hesitation on your part when it's a young first-time director and you know, they haven't done much before, and is there a hesitation into going into something like that?
Well, hesitation may imply more dread than there was, but there always is. There's a sort of thing when you deal with directors that have just come out of film school, that there is more unity in the way they want to direct a project. There's a unity of approach and a thought on how they want to film something, that when you work with someone like Ridley Scott, or when you work with somebody who's done a million things, and in a way they just start painting on the set free form with the way they want to film a scene. And I just, it's amazing when you work with directors that have lots of experience and you go like, wow. And it's the same thing when you work with actors who have lots of experience. They're not as worried about certain things, and they're more worried about other things than somebody who's like just out of film school or just starting. But like working with Chris, I was amazed at the amount of coverage he wanted and the type of coverage he got. So, we would shoot the scene, and the scene would be shot pretty much of let's say Leonard meeting Sammy and Sammy's wife at the house, and we'd shoot it the way you would normally shoot it. But then Chris went in and got lots of extra close-ups where you're dealing with parts of faces, with eyes, with hands, with mouth. And I'm going like, how are they going to cut this together? What is this going to be about? And as an actor, I was fortunately on the set enough to where I could go like, oh, it makes it more of an internal dialogue when you have that kind of coverage. And that brings that element of the script and all of the repetition. Memento has a lot of repetition if you haven't seen it. It's each scene, it's almost as if the film is shot backwards. And so scene 2 has to look a lot like scene 1, but going kind of in reversing in the story. Having all of those close-ups make the film more an internal monologue, and it brought that element of the script out, which reading the script, I did not feel that internal monologue, which is probably my deficit of not seeing that in the script. So that was a revelation to me working with Chris, is that you begin to see what he's bringing out in the script with his coverage.
And when you're on set and a director is doing something like that, where you're sitting there thinking, well, how is this going to cut together? What does that unsettle you at all, or does it more intrigue you? Sort of which side does it?
Yeah, I have a few rules that I do as an actor, and this I've learned through kind of experience. The more you have a moving camera, the more naturalistic your acting has to be. Because the moving camera is saying that the narrator is omnipotent. The storyteller of the film is the camera, and as it moves, it's telling you, the audience, we're looking at this from all sides, and this person who we're filming is unaware that the audience is moving around them. Consequently, if you really have a handheld camera as opposed to a steady cam, then I'm saying you have got to play it as if it is absolute naturalism as an actor. Whereas if the camera is on sticks, or if the camera is set in place, you can play it as if it's a proscenium on the proscenium theater. You could be as big and broad as you want. If you take a look at Groundhog Day, We shot each one of those scenes where I'm Ned, I'm the insurance salesman, I meet Bill Murray on the street. We shot each one of those street scenes, and there were originally 9 of them, with a different camera technique. So we shot, one of them was handheld. And so the handheld technique is when I began to realize, I need to not be as huge as I was on the first scene when the camera was on sticks. So, I look at that now as a film technique. I just did a Law and Order in New York, and I think they have that show in the UK as well. Yeah. And a lot of times they're big with the swinging singles. If you have that terminology there, where you're on you have a handheld camera, but it's on a Steadicam, and it's got a gyro on it to keep it kind of stable, and you're doing it a single on one person, and then you sweep over, and in the same shot you get the single of the next person. When you're doing something like that, you got to be naturalistic, and that's how you could always tell usually the guest cast on Law and Order from the regular cast. The regular cast has it down, and that
it's like a machine. It's like a machine.
Yes. So I mean, maybe I don't think that's too much in the weeds for your audience, since you really do have a film-based audience. But if it is, my apologies to the audience.
No, it's great. I mean, I like to think our podcast is very eclectic, so I think we get we've gone quite geeky with music before, and comedy, and I just sort of think, well, they've got to keep up. so don't worry.
Here's one thing that was interesting, like working with Ridley Scott, and you begin to see this as somebody with enormous experience and the ability to shoot any kind of movie he wants, is that he very often will shoot a master, a 2-shot, and a close-up at the same time. Really. And as an actor, and the way he does it is he'll set the master up in the back. He'll have a second camera picking up a 2-shot from one angle, and then he'll have a moving shot underneath all of these coming around, capturing close-ups of the actors. And the amazing freedom you feel as an actor is, it's all going to cut together because it's the same damn shot. It doesn't, you have 3 cameras which are capturing the same image in a different way, so it will always cut together. You don't have to worry now was I holding my fork with my right hand or my left hand? If he uses that footage, it's all going to work. It's all going to cut.
Yeah.
And that's what you see really experienced directors know how to do.
I can't imagine, like, even just thinking about shooting with 3 cameras at once. It's crazy. It's enough to try and think about what one camera's doing, let alone like.
Yes.
But then I'm not Ridley Scott, so yet. So to sort of park Memento, because otherwise anyone who hasn't seen it will probably be a bit behind. Going back to your podcast, the Tobolowsky Files, and your books and stories, I was just wondering, because you tell a sort of a big variety of different stories, but some of them can be quite personal. And I was wondering if obviously you said you wrote him originally for your 2 boys to hear your stories. But I was wondering if you ever worried about sort of exposing yourself too much, people knowing too many stories about you, if you see what I mean.
You walk into that trap when you start telling, and I tell people this in my acting class. I ask people a series of questions, and I said, just answer them truthfully. And the question, here, let me ask you some questions. Shall I ask you some questions like you do?
Yeah, okay. Let's do it.
So you have to answer these questions truthfully. Okay?
Okay. I can cut them out.
Yes.
I can cut them out later.
What kind of car do you drive?
I don't drive.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
No.
Do you have any pets?
No. But I want a dog. But I don't have no.
Have you ever been in jail?
No.
Have you ever been in the hospital?
Not for anything major.
Well, what were you in the hospital for?
I broke my arm, but nothing.
Who was the first person you ever fell in love with?
Probably my current girlfriend at the moment.
And what's her name?
Evie.
And when did you know you had fallen in love with her?
Oh. I don't know. That's difficult. Well, I think so she told me that she loved me first, and I'd never been in a sort of a long in like a serious relationship before. So I think she told me she loved me, and I didn't know how to respond. I think I laughed actually when she first told me, which is not a good. I wouldn't advise doing that. And then I think so. I didn't really say it back. Well, I think I said it back, but I didn't know if I meant it because I didn't really know if I was in love or not. And then I think we weren't living together at the time, and then I sort of went away, and then that's sort of that day I sort of was thinking about it more, and I was like, well, I guess I do love her then. I guess that's what this is. Yeah.
Now, what we just did was there is a series of questions. Some of them are very simple to answer. Like, what do you drive?
Yeah.
Have you ever been in a hospital? Some are more embarrassing to answer. Have you ever been in jail? Who was the first person you fell in love with? Now we're getting into questions that, it easily crosses a line into something that's incredibly personal. And I want the audience to recognize that as James was thinking of these answers, now I'm able to see his picture here because we're on Skype here, but as the questions became more personal and more difficult to answer, there were pauses. And the pauses work theatrically because thought is theatrical. And there was enormous suspense as to what he was going to say, as to when and we felt we were going in on a really personal journey with something of value on the other end of that. And your revelation that she said she loved you first and you weren't sure, and then you thought about it, and then you go like, yeah, that's what this is. We know about you and love now, which is about as personal a story as being in the hospital or being in jail. But if you were to take that material that you just said and did it on some soap opera British TV show, or do it on what we call in America Lifetime television, it would be, your performance would have been more like, well, I don't really know when I first loved her. I think she was the one who told me she loved me first. But then I thought about it some and realized that's what love is. Now, that's why that kind of stuff is bullshit. And when the truth is powerful, like what you just did, people just say it. They just say it. And you have to remember that as an actor, that just tell the truth, and it's incredibly potent. And so getting back to your question, I start telling these stories in my podcast that I feel are completely innocent stories about when I fell in love with Claire Richards, when she played the piano when she was 8 years old. Who knows about this story? And I talk about how I wanted to play the piano to be like Claire. And I'm telling this story about falling in love with Claire Richards. And I have a new story coming out about Claire Richards, about when I was in 6th grade and she invited me to her birthday party. And you think like, well, that's innocent. So I was doing my stories in at Harvard University. One of the first shows I did, and then in Cambridge, I did 3 shows at the Brattle Theater. And after the show, a young woman came up to me, and she said, "I'm Claire Richards' daughter. And I heard your story about my mother, and I want to thank you because I never knew anything about my mother as a little girl." This last year, I was doing a show in Portland, Oregon, which is a city in the United States, very close to Seattle, that also has a lot of drug addicts sleeping on the ground. But they have a great, great bookstore called Powell's Bookstore, and I was doing a show there. And I was telling some of my stories, I think a Stevie Ray Vaughan story or something like that. I was telling a story and for a group of people, and at the back of the audience, I see a face that makes me stop. And I'm going, it's Claire Richards. Except not Claire Richards as she would be, because now I'm almost 68 years old. It wouldn't be like the 68 years old Claire Richards. This is like Claire Richards as I knew her when she was in high school. And I could hardly speak. And then at the end of the show, my eyes keep going to this girl, this woman, and people are lining up to buy a book from me and to get an autograph and all this. And I come up, and this woman comes up to me, and I said, "I'm so sorry. I keep staring at you. And I don't know. You remind me of someone I was in love with." And she said, "I'm her daughter. I'm Claire's youngest daughter. And I live in Utah, and I happen to be visiting friends in Portland. I heard on TV that you were going to be here, and I came here to see you because I needed to tell you about your stories about my mother, in that my mother never told us about her childhood. And everything I know about my mother comes from you. And I wanted to thank you for your stories." So you start telling these stories that mean nothing. Claire Richards playing the piano when she's 8, or other stories where I took Claire to the prom. These stories have profound impact on other people, because it's their story too. And you don't know. In my life, I had first love, Beth, that I talk about in my podcast. And we were together for 16 years, and the relationship didn't work out. And I began to write these stories in the podcast about me and Beth to try to come to terms with the hurt and the anger and all the stuff you feel when you've had a breakup, and a bad breakup, and trying to come to grips with that. And then she became one of my main characters in the book. I hadn't spoken to Beth in 30 years, over 30 years. And Beth, I was doing One Day at a Time this last year over at Sony, that's on Netflix now. And I get a phone call, and on my little card thing goes, "Beth Henley." And I almost wet myself. Fortunately, I'm at the age where I wear an adult diaper all the time. So I answered the phone, and she said, I heard, I saw you tell some stories about me. And how did you become you? And we had a 40-minute conversation, the first real conversation we've had in years. My wife, Ann, told me, said, you have to call Beth and tell her you're writing stories about her. You have to tell her. You have to find her and tell her. And so part of the Tobolowsky Files was the quest to find Beth, because I had lost track of her. I hadn't talked to her in 2 decades at that time. So we had lunch, and I'm sure she thought I had cancer or something and was doing the farewell tour and just wanted to say, kind of goodbye to her. And we had this conversation later, and I realized, now I'm going back to one of your far earlier points, the danger of telling a true story is that it does change reality. It doesn't report on the past. It changes the past. Because part of telling a story, part of shooting a film, is the editorial process. You don't say everything and you don't shoot everything. So the parts you cut out end up not becoming a part of your reality anymore once you commit them to art, either writing or performing. And so I had changed reality in terms of my relationship with Beth and my relationship with my wife. It was remarkable. So that's one of the big dangers of telling a true story, but I think it's worth it. That's why all my stories are true.
When you asked me about who was the first person I fell in love with, I suddenly felt uncomfortable, if you see what I mean. Like, you know what I mean? Like, not to say you made me feel uncomfortable, but like, you know, I suddenly, it's weird how, and I guess as an actor, you're probably in touch with that sort of side of you more because you have to go there to act and to do things convincingly. But when you asked me that, I just suddenly was like, oh, okay, now, I've got to express.
Yes, but see, what you're saying is the critical point. And that is one of the questions I ask the actors when I ask these questions, like, have you ever been in jail? Have you ever been in the hospital? You know, who's the first person you fell in love with? I go, how tall are you? How tall are you? And, you know, they'll say, oh, I'm 5'8". And then I go, how much do you weigh? And they said, none of your business. And I go like, no, you can't say no to things. Because once you start saying no, people will always say no to the weight question. Not always, but especially women. They don't want to answer the weight question. Yeah. Once, as an actor or performer or a writer, you start saying no, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to answer that question. No is very, very contagious. And you end up saying no to everything. And then you have nothing to say. So you have to, as an actor, you have to say, I'm going to be truthful about this. I'm going to tell the truth about whatever I can. Of course, as a writer, as a director like you are, you know, you don't have to do that all the time. But you have to hire actors who do.
I'm always interested, and it's something that I've talked on the podcast before with another guest about religion and faith, because I'm not religious in any way, and so, but I always find it interesting to talk to someone who looks at their faith in a sort of in a rational kind of analytical way, as you seem to do, and there was just something you said, because I've been going down the Stephen Tobolowsky rabbit hole for the last few days. There's something you say about your relationship with faith, about how you say almost everything I've known in my life has been wrong. And you sort of use that to sort of question your faith and have an ongoing relationship with, and I just sort of wanted to ask you about that, I guess. I haven't really asked you a question, but...
Yes. I think about everybody I know, too, nobody really knows anything. And one of the simple things religion does is it creates a kind of world view in which somewhere there is perfect knowledge, perfect beauty, a perfect morality that you can aspire to. The thing that I find that most people have arguments with religion is not the idea of religion, but how it's exercised.
Yeah. Same
thing with Hollywood. Everybody thinks they come out here and they want an agent. You know, what I tell people is Hollywood is a place with very few gates and very many gatekeepers. An agent is just a gatekeeper. And the same thing with religion. The idea of connecting with something that is absolute beauty and absolute truth is different than following the rules of the priest or the whatever, saying this is the way we're going to interpret that. You take a look, like My Faith is Judaism, and I find this very interesting. It's a perfect example. Judaism, very old religion, 5,000-6,000 years old. During that period of time, there is no consecutive narrative as to the Hebrew people and their relationship to God. I mean, it's all over the map. You have periods of time in human history in which people believed the truth can be known. We're living during one of those periods of time now. When you live through those periods of time, you think science is really cool. But then there are equal periods of time which are just as powerful, in which everybody believes that the truth cannot be known, that the only way you can get to the truth is probably with a little weed or a little ganja or going to see the guru in India, that the truth is something that is layers and layers and layers beyond what you're doing. Like, take a look at Woodstock. I mean, we're coming to the anniversary of Woodstock. There's a huge period of time with people that believed that it was cool and it was accepted. Truth cannot be known, man. The way you get through truth is through rock and roll and dancing and music, and let it go, man, and the truth will come in. Look at the Beatles. You don't have anything that's more truthful than the Beatles. And I always, side note, I always tell writers, if you're interested in being a good writer, look at a Beatles song. They always start with an immediate problem. You think you lost your love? I saw her yesterday. And it's you she's thinking of, and she told me what to say. She said she loved you. And you know that can't be bad. Yeah. They begin, I think I'm going to be sad. I think it's today. I read the news today, oh boy, about a lucky man who... Every song begins with like, wow, I'm hooked. And that's what writers have to do at the beginning of their script. I remember John Ford used to take scripts, and before he read them from their writers, he would just tear off the first 30 pages and wouldn't even read them. He says, oh, this is just junk, because they're always trying to work their way into the story. In terms of God, I love, like behind me, you could see this, like these are Talmuds right there, and there's the Torah over here. You look at a period of time in which you believe man could understand the truth. And during that period of time, you have something like the 10 Commandments. You take a look at that. That's a template for a civilization that will work. You don't tell lies. You don't covet your neighbor. You don't murder. You don't steal. You honor your father and your mother, and you honor the holiness of a day, that our life, that our life is holy. There's a specialness about life. 10 rules. That's it. 10. If you do that, you're going to have a perfect civilization. But at the same time, in these very same books in Judaism, you got a weird period of time where they say where they were all getting high. And the way they used to get high, and they talk about in the Talmud, is like bleeding. They would do bloodletting. And if you let a certain amount of blood, you get kind of high, and you're able to focus and see God when you're high. And so they have rules in the Talmud about how much blood to let and when you should let blood, when not to let. And it's like, you're going like, wow. Now how do you make both of those worlds coexist? You can't. And you realize that what we are as humans are this layer cake of truth and the impossibility of knowing truth. And you have to find some way to join those two worlds together. And the only way you can do it is metaphor. And that is why film is so powerful. That is why visual arts, painting, is so powerful. And you take a look at the Scream, that very famous painting that was done up there in Norway. And You see that and you know everything about that world and that guy, but you understand it on an intuitive level. So for me, I have a story in one of my first books called A Wager with Freddie in the Dangerous Animals Club, in which I'm in a bar and this guy, this professional gambler, is on my case. Like and finally, and he's talking down God and all this sort of stuff that, trying to get my goat. And I said, okay, this is the deal. I'll bet you. I'll gamble with you that I could prove to you God exists right here, right now in 15 minutes. And so the story is about that bet and how that worked out for me. And I think it's very interesting. I just performed that live for the first time a couple nights ago. And I think for me, the overview says, in Hebrew, the word kadosh is translated in the Bible as holy, but that isn't what it means. What it really means is separate. Like I see against the wall, you have these guitars, and each guitar, you kept both guitars for some reason, or they're either two different people's guitars. I'm looking at them, I'm seeing like one has the two pickups, one, they look like one's a hollow body and one, yeah.
This one's a hollow body. This one's like an acoustic sort of, but it's got a pickup as well.
Yes, but they're both there. They're both there because they both mean something very special, something very different. They are kadosh. They are apart from the millions of guitars that exist out in the world. These are the two you have in this room. Those guitars are separate, and those guitars become holy. And in our life, we develop a set of what is holy and what is not holy. And from that idea, I think, comes man's need to reach for a final arbiter of holiness, which becomes our notion of God. So whether you believe in God or not doesn't matter, because you still got guitars leaning against your wall.
Yeah.
And your selection of those guitars, and whether you let me show you something. Just a second.
Sure.
You see this stick?
Yeah.
This stupid stick. This was a stick I picked up off the ground on that last horseback riding trip to Iceland when I broke my neck. This stick. Now, I didn't know when I picked this stick up. I thought, well, this is interesting. I didn't know when I picked it up that in a few minutes I would almost be killed. But I kept the stupid stick. I still have it. It's right up here next to my Talmuds and my set of the holy. Why? It has nothing to do with the idea that I want crap all over my house. But it's that this stick represents the fact that I was almost killed this day, that I picked up this stick, and I'm here to tell the tale. And for some reason, it's in front of my Talmuds. It's in my set of the holy. That's what we do in life. We amass these holy books, even though they're not books. They're guitars and sticks.
I think I think that's really interesting. And I think it was when you said about how someone is, back to the, a quote I was reading, you say about someone who is, this is paraphrasing, but someone who is certain about something is good at answers, but not good at asking questions. And I think we can all be like quite guilty of that sometimes. And I think because I don't believe in God, but I always thought I can't say truly that I don't subscribe to a certain religion if I don't know what these religions are about. So I've made an effort to read the Bible, read the Torah, read the Quran, or obviously I can't read them in Hebrew or Arabic, but English versions of them, to just so that I at least have an understanding of what's in them before I can make my mind up as to what I believe. But I still think there's always you've always got to be sort of readjusting your thoughts on things, and it's interesting to hear someone who subscribes to religion that is something that you're doing all the time as well.
Well, you have to understand, the reason I do it, the reason I subscribe, like in my case to Judaism, is because I've seen it work historically. I've seen that the process of thought that is in this faith has made the world better, whether it be with the Ten Commandments or whether it be, in the Torah, there is a delineation of killing people. There's murdering, like lying in wait to murder someone. And then there is killing someone by accident. And then there's like having an ox that gets loose in your yard and it kills somebody. So it's the first time people have said there's a difference in our crimes. So we have to have different punishments. And from this idea of the difference became Law and Order, which was a television show I just did. It will be playing in the UK soon, I hope. Yeah, but
that's a fantastic callback.
I do it because it works. For me, it works.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work, then I could see why you wouldn't want to subscribe to religion. But for me, it works, and it works powerfully.
So there you have it, Stephen Tobolowsky. My thanks to Stephen for appearing on the show. Hopefully we'll get him back at another point to carry on the conversation. Also, I think Stephen would appreciate me giving a shout out to the television show that is currently on Netflix, One Day at a Time. It was cancelled recently by Netflix despite receiving multiple awards and award nominations, and they're trying at the moment to find a new home for it. And so a way that you can help that and help Stephen and the rest of the cast and crew out of One Day at a Time is to go and watch the show on Netflix, and then maybe tweet and Facebook about how much you love the show. I know Stephen would really appreciate it, and hey, it's an award-winning show, so why not go check it out and enjoy something you may not have seen before. Thank you for joining me. Join us again next time for another fascinating conversation with another fascinating individual. That's very loud. I live in a flat that's right by a road, and people tend to scream down this road. It's a long, straight road, so you get a few nutters drag racing up and down. And I've got the window open because it's incredibly hot in London at the moment. So excuse that. Thank you for joining me. And until next time, I've been James Albarn, and this is The Last Line.